I would like to welcome you all to the first EIWO policy webinar. And first of all, yes, the webinar will be recorded. I think you got a warning when you all entered here. It will be published online. I hope it's okay. Otherwise, if you did not agree, you would not be able to join here soon. EIWO is a research and policy program on exclusion and inequality in late working life. You may have looked at the EIWO web page. It's funded by FORDA, the Swedish Research Council for Health, Welfare, Working Life and Welfare. And it's coordinated by the Division Aging and Social Change at Linköping University with partners from Krakow, Poland, Fechter and Dortmund in Germany, and Sheffield in the UK. And it's the program ambition to contribute to the European discussion on the issue and to feedback to the Swedish policy process on late work equality and inclusion in times of population aging or structural changes and social change. And doing so, EIWO builds on previous issues like MOPACT and Extend, as well as a great network of an international network and seniors and junior scholars. You will meet several of us today here and hear presentations also from this network. And we started this webinar series in autumn 2021. With today's webinars, you may have seen in the invitation on the website that there's 3 more webinars announced already, and we may continue this series also next year after a brief evaluation of the format and of how it works in general. And we will send out invitations to all of you to the following webinars, to all who registered for today's event. From the perspective of EIWO, Alan Walker, Liam Foster and Rachel Croster, professor and senior lecturers at social policy at the University of Sheffield, will start with a research-based overview on extending working lives in 4 countries, inequalities and policies. And then we are happy to have Professor Eskil Wartensjö, Professor Emeritus in Labor Economics at Stockholm University. And I think you're still a research fellow at the Institute for Labor Economics in Bonn, and you're also, most of all, member of EIWO's European Policy Advisory Committee. Dr. Ettore Marchetti, a policy expert from the European Commission, and Tor Hartevold, economist at the Swedish Association of Local Authorities and Regions. I think it's shorter in Swedish, it's municipalities and regions. And from Stockholm, with impulse statements on today's webinar topic. And we will then open the virtual floor to all of you to get feedback on this from you, and have a discussion also among the panelists or with the panelists. I'm sure time will not be sufficient for this case, so feel free to contact all participants directly, or contact especially Annika Heuer, whom we had contact with, also Gülin Öylü, whom we had contact with in the registration process, and they will redirect your messages to those you want to approach. You found the contact details in the webinar invitation, probably also in the communication that you had in advance. And yeah, of course, you can always contact all participants directly, but that may be more complicated, but simply do as you prefer. And please, Alan, Liam, and Rachel, the screens are basically yours, so there is no floor today. And yeah, I look forward to hearing your presentations.
Thank you very much indeed, Andreas, and welcome everybody. If Rachel could put our slides up, that would be great. Okay, so as Andreas said, this is the first EIWO webinar, and it's a joint presentation from the UK team at the University of Sheffield. My name's Alan Walker, and we're focusing on a sub-project within the overall EIWO project, and that's concerned with a comparison of the 4 participant countries. Next one, please. Next slide, Rachel, thank you. So in this presentation, we'll give you a quick outline of this sub-project 5. We'll focus on participation in the labour force of those aged 55 and over. We will concentrate on the 4 constituent countries, Germany, Poland, Sweden, and the UK. And what we're doing is presenting some preliminary results. Next one, please. So here's just a quick summary of the sub-project 5 and the researchers involved, the aims of the project. And all I need to do at this stage is to say that our main sources for this presentation are the 4 national reports produced by our colleagues in EIWO, and they're all listed at the bottom of that slide. But those are the main sources, and each of the countries produced a national report that contains all of the detail that we're drawing on in the main part of our presentation today. And all of those reports will find their way to the EIWO website in due course. Next one, please, Rachel. Now, before we get into the details from those national reports, let's provide some context. And these OECD data illustrate significant national differences and also within countries continuing gender differences across 2 decades. Of the 4 countries in our project, only Poland is below the EU average participation rate, due primarily, as you can see, to the low female participation rate in Poland. The trends across the 2 decades show a consistent increase, but at different rates. Sweden retains its pole position with the highest participation rate, and overall, certainly, but also by gender. But Germany has the most rapid increase in that period. And you notice from the graph, from the table, that Germany started below the UK in terms of labour force participation of those 55 to 64 back in 2000, but halfway through the period, it overtook the UK. The next one, please. Now we can see similar trends for those aged 60 to 64 in the poor countries and across the EU 27 as a whole. The increase in participation in Germany, particularly for women, that's at the top, I think in international terms is truly remarkable. The next one, please, Rachel. Changes in the 65 plus age group, excuse me, are much lower and slower, with Sweden's rise to 2010 and then decline, and the UK's significant increase, particularly among women, being the 2 standout features of that table. Next. Now those figures contained in the previous tables are summarized in these age profiles for the 4 countries and again for the EU 27. And you can see at a glance that Poland clearly has the youngest profile of the 4 countries. The other 4 follow more or less a similar pattern. There are differences in the age group peaks, but clearly Poland is the main outlier among the 4 countries. And the next one, please. Similarly with duration of working life, Sweden sustains the longest working lives and Poland the shortest. In fact, excuse me, Poland is clearly 2 years below the EU average in duration of working life. So that is an overview, a very quick overview of the participation among those aged 55 and over in the 4 countries and in comparison with the EU. Now, the next stage of our presentation is to delve more deeply beneath those macro figures to understand some of the reasons for those differences. I'm going to hand over for that to my colleague, Liam Foster.
Hello, everyone. Thanks, Alan. So yes, as Alan's just said, I want to provide a bit of an overview of the 4 countries and also move on to focus on some of the different policies. Obviously, this will be relatively brief given time constraints, but I want to think about some of the key policies in relation to extending working lives. So, as Alan's already indicated, in terms of trends in late working life, Poland is below the EU average, whereas Germany and Sweden are above the EU average, and UK also is above the EU average, but only just. In terms of timing of extending working life policies, it's worth noting that Poland is later than the other three countries in relation to extending working lives. EU membership was in 2004, which had some impact on policy developments around extending working lives. And in 2012, there was a European Year for Active Ageing and Solidarity Between Generations, which also brought the topic on the national agenda really in Poland, especially as Poland ranked last in the first edition of the Active Ageing Index. So some of the key drivers of extending working lives policies have certainly been associated with pension sustainability, workforce aging, but depending on the country, they've also been associated with labour shortages, age perceptions and skills deficits, for instance. I'm not going to spend much time going through that here. The demographic context is also important to consider in relation to extending working lives. And what you can see is that in Germany and Poland, it's been ageing and decline, so declines in birth rate, whereas in Sweden and the UK, ageing has played an important part. Next slide, please, Rachel. So if we move on to think about breadwinner models in the different countries, I would argue that Germany and Sweden have a weak dual breadwinner model, whereas Poland and the UK still have a strong male breadwinner ideology. It is worth noting, though, that certainly in the UK, women have become more prominent in terms of the labour market, but much of that is on a part-time, less secure basis than their male counterparts. It's also worth noting differences in terms of social partnerships. Germany and Sweden have long histories of social partnerships and strong social partnerships. Poland, relatively weak in this respect, and the UK, it's not really something that is considered in this way. So in terms of the welfare or social policy regimes of the different countries, Germany is conservative corporatist, so it emphasizes strong job protection supported by collective agreements, these social partnerships. And there's also an emphasis on active labour market policies. If we now move on to consider Poland, it's in transition from an ex-communist country, strongly autocratic with a leaning towards liberalism. And there's some recognition of the three sectors, so government, private sector and trade unions in Poland. And Jolanta, who did the Polish report, referred to the welfare regime in Poland since 2004 as characterized by 4 U's, it being uncoordinated, unsystematic, unpredictable and unstable. Sweden is arguably in transition and could be seen to represent a hybrid between social democratic and liberal regimes. And again, could argue the UK is in transition from liberal to neoliberal policy dynamics, so a slightly different role for the state. But the family has played interesting roles in terms of welfare provision as well. Next slide, please, Rachel. So now I want to touch on some of the different policies associated with extending working lives. We've categorized these as strong, weak or moderate in terms of how extensive they are in relation to the particular countries, and this is based on the information from the national reports, as Alan has already acknowledged. So it's also worth pointing out that there could have been slightly different configurations, and there are overlaps between some of the policy areas as well. So if we think about health protection, provision and rehabilitation throughout the life course, it can certainly have a positive effect on prospects of extending working lives. It's evident that while there's an acknowledgement of links between health and the labour market, the focus isn't always on later working lives. And there are variations between the countries in relation to the focus on health. So in Germany, for instance, health promotion, prevention and rehabilitation, much more extensive and seen as key policy concepts in extending working lives. In the UK, it's much more moderate, and preventative measures encouraging workers to consider their health are often confined to case studies of good practice. And the same, I think, also applies in relation to Poland. Pensions need to be considered when looking at extending working lives. Increases in the age at which a pension can be received can affect people's planning for retirement. And there are certainly evident key inequalities in relation to pensions, gender, social class, education, among other aspects. The UK has been particularly active in relation to pension policies, including faster increases in the state pension age and the ability to accrue higher benefits through postponing pensions. Similarly, in Germany, the state pension age has been increased with more opportunities to work and earn an unlimited income. And Sweden has restricted access to publicly funded early retirement schemes. I think Poland's a particularly interesting case when we consider pensions and extending working lives. It's one of the only European countries in recent memory to actually lower its age of eligibility. And there are differences between men and women in the retirement age, and these can be discriminatory for women, putting them at a higher risk of losing their jobs. This is associated with job protection measures near to retirement. Social security and unemployment benefits have got an important role in encouraging extending working lives around generosity, eligibility and conditionality. And certainly they've played an important role in closing routes out of the labour market in late working life, especially in Germany, Sweden and the UK. Although it's worth noting that many of these policies aren't explicitly targeted at older workers. Care support, also an important factor in terms of extending working lives. Combination of work and care responsibilities can result in unintentional part-time work, involuntary early retirement and financial insecurity. It's most well developed in Sweden, based on a dual earning approach and higher labour market participation amongst both genders. So it's perhaps not surprising in that respect. Civil rights, such as anti-age discrimination, are also worth considering. The UK officially abolished the default retirement age in 2011. And the Equality Act means employers must avoid direct discrimination. However, there is also research that indicates employers don't treat age discrimination as seriously as other protected characteristics. Germany is an interesting example, as in contrast to Anglo-Saxon countries, a culture of age discrimination in gainful employment is significantly less pronounced. And it's feared that the introduction of such terminology would exacerbate existing negative images of older people. In Sweden, there's no fixed retirement age, although those over the age of 68 have lower protection. Employment conditions are also important. Employment conditions such as health and safety, flexible working, for instance, and they impact on whether people remain in the labour market. Germany is interesting in terms of the role of collective bargaining that I previously mentioned, playing an important role in the concrete formulation of company working policies. And Sweden, research has shown that dissatisfaction with working conditions is below the EU average. And finally, lifelong learning appreciate it's a bit of a whistle-stop tour through these policy areas. Opportunities obviously aren't available equally, depending on previous education levels, sectors, and so on. In the UK, lifelong learning in relation to older workers is particularly disappointing. Older workers much less likely than younger ones to have opportunities for training, development, and progression, with only Turkey and Slovenia having lower levels of training across this age group. In Poland, there are important ambitions, but again, relatively low in relation to EU counterparts. Sweden stands out as a country with high participation rates, and the main obligation for education provision lies in state-funded institutions and free vocational and higher education. Thank you. Over to Rachel to consider some of the inequalities in more detail.
Hello everybody. So there are 12 main inequalities that we've picked out from these 4 country reports, which you can see on this slide here. It's important to note that while these inequalities exist in all 4 of the EIWO countries, they don't present in the same way or to the same extent across the board. So things like the demographic profile of each country, cultural expectations, and political history can all influence the prevalence and impact of these inequalities on extended working lives. And it's important to note as well that these inequalities are rarely lone agents, so they overlap and reinforce each other, and I'll talk a little bit about that in a minute. But each one has a distinct impact on extended working lives. And I'm going to cover gender, health, and ethnicity in relation to intersectional inequality, but I'll just give you some very brief examples of some of these inequalities within an ageing working population. So for migration, Poland's seen a large number of emigrants contributing to the ageing population, whereas Sweden's seen a large number of working age immigrants, which has actually slowed the rate of the ageing population. Germany, on the other hand, has a positive net migration, but the labour force population is continuing to decline. For education, qualification requirements for jobs have increased over the past few decades. Education levels are increasing among the older population, but they're more likely to have out-of-date qualifications and less likely to hold formal qualifications. In the UK and Germany, education's weighted towards the front end of working life, and similarly in Poland, older workers have limited access to education opportunities. Sweden has a much more opportunistic attitude towards lifelong learning, with higher rates of education during paid work, but take-up remains low for older workers. For income, people on lower incomes are more likely to have lower pension accrual and lower savings than higher earners. And in the UK, financial concern is the most common reason for staying in employment past pension age, whereas in Germany, it's much less of an influence. Poland has a different situation, as the decrease in the pension age will see a longer drawing period, meaning lower pensions, but the number of people drawing the minimum pension is going to increase. For occupation, concerns about extended working lives are more commonly found in physically demanding industries. Age management policies across the board tend to be more accessible for higher skilled workers, and larger employers are more likely to have an equal opportunity policy and a recognised union. And interestingly, the unemployment rate for workers aged 50 to 64 is not too dissimilar as that for 35 to 49 age group, but the length of unemployment increases with age, and that's true for all the EIWO countries, as is the increase in part-time work with age regardless of sector. So here's a breakdown of the main inequalities by country. As you can see, there's quite a lot of overlap in the countries, and as it stands, none of the 4 are specifically prioritising an inequality in policy. However, looking at the impact of policy on inequality in each of the countries specifically is something that we will be doing as the research progresses. And one of the theoretical contributions of the EIWO programme is bringing together cumulative disadvantage theory and this idea of social risk. So disadvantages earlier in the life course entail disadvantages later, which strengthens differences in socioeconomic resources and status over time. And what's particularly interesting about the application of this theory in EIWO is the focus across the whole life and work course prior to retirement age. So these inequalities interact on multiple levels to reinforce disadvantage through overlapping social positions, statuses, and identities. So it's not just a simple case of adding up discrimination, but creating unique experiences in each individual person. And I'd like to give you just a few examples of this from our recent research. So in the UK and Germany, women are more likely to have time out for children and return part-time or to insecure employment, with a similar pattern in Sweden, which means lower pension contributions, and that's regardless of sector. In Germany, married women have a much lower rate of employment than married men and unmarried women, and former long-term unemployment is a predictor of social inequality in later working life, which in turn is linked to lower education level and part-time employment. And this disproportionately impacts women due to the male breadwinner model. In Sweden, women are more likely to work in teams, have less control over their work, and do more mentally demanding jobs. Yet there's an increasing trend for women staying in work after retirement age, due in part to male pensions being much higher than for women. And this is even more pronounced in Poland, where the retirement age for women is lower than for men. And all of this is compounded by women being at higher risk of carer status in all 4 countries, which is linked to poorer quality of health and a weaker attachment to the labour market, causing early exit. Health is linked to occupation for both men and women, with lower skilled manual professions more likely to experience hazardous working conditions and work on average longer hours than the higher skilled white collar workers, which can cause or exacerbate health conditions. These occupations also account for a high proportion of self-employed workers, meaning occupational access to support is less likely. However, it's also these professions that are associated with low income, subsequent low pensions, and necessitating the extension of working life, which causes this double bind where the poorer older workers need to work longer due to financial insecurity, but they can't do that because of poor health. Ethnicity, like gender, reinforces other types of discrimination. So minoritized ethnic groups are more likely to live in poverty due to higher rates of unemployment, lower wages, low education levels, and insecure employment, as well as more likely to live in deprived neighbourhoods with poor quality housing. However, ethnicity covers a diverse group in itself in terms of socioeconomic difference. So for example, Asian women with higher education levels had a relatively high rate of retirement saving, whereas Pakistani and Bangladeshi women were far less likely to be in a position to save throughout the working life course. And age is a factor that reinforces these cumulative inequality throughout working life. So gender and ethnicity gaps are more pronounced for older workers, as are health inequalities and declines in both training provision and opportunity. Even geographical disadvantage becomes magnified with old age. So as older workers are less likely to travel for work, and on average they commute a lot less further than younger age groups as well. So you can see how there's a level of interplay between these inequalities and discrimination, and that they react differently in different individuals, in different settings, under different socio-political circumstances. And whilst these aspects of individuals can't easily be accounted for in policy, as it stands, all 4 EIWO countries have a bit of a way to go in both acknowledging and addressing this intersectional inequality. I'll pass back over to Alan.
Thank you very much indeed, Rachel. So in conclusion, our preliminary findings reveal significant differences in approaches to late working life between the 4 countries. Some of those differences appear to be located within their respective welfare or social policy regimes. For example, it's clear that the social democratic and corporatist regimes of Sweden and Germany, respectively, are more conducive to women's later life work participation than those of Poland and the UK. In none of the 4, however, is there any sign of engagement with a systematic life course or work course approach to policy design. If there are policies, they tend to be focused on later life, older worker policies, rather than on the life course or work course. Moreover, there are also no signs of a concerted approach to tackling exclusion and inequalities in late working life. And I should add here that we have not covered in this presentation the impact of the COVID pandemic, but we will do so in the final report, which will go to the EIWO website. We do expect that COVID is having a considerable impact on older workers, at least on the basis of the evidence in the UK, and COVID may reduce the re-employment prospects of some of those older workers, and the most heavy disadvantage is likely to fall on those already disadvantaged in the labour market. And then finally, there's clearly room for policy learning, particularly among EU countries. And I have to say from the UK that the UK is not likely to learn anything in the current political climate, but at least policy learning between EU countries. But what is really required is a fundamental rethink of the dominant policy paradigm and a move towards a life course or work course orientation. And that orientation should be aimed at preventing both exclusion and inequalities. Thank you very much.
Yeah, sorry. Thanks you all for a great introduction, also for describing the policy basis of EIWO. And I now look for where we decided, or we agreed that we will have comments after all presentations. So now I look forward to asking Vantia's input. And I know that you wrote or coordinated a report on the possibilities of early retirement and international experiences. I'm looking forward to hearing about it.
Thank you. And I have some slides. If you take the first page, have it. I could say a few words. It's about the government asked us to make an investigation of different possibilities to take an early pensions in different countries, because it's the origin of that was that lots of discussion about how to handle people who couldn't work until the age of 68 or something like that. It's increasing all the time. Gulin, do you have my slides?
I can share them.
Yeah, that's fine. So this is the title. The first is the title of the presentation, and I will say something about it. It's a report on 160 pages now in Swedish. It will be published later this year in English, probably in November or December, and we will just now writing an article based on it. And it's the possibilities for early retirement, and we are comparing different countries. But we could take the next slide. The next page. The starting point of the discussion is that we have the age for pension is enhanced in Sweden as a political response to the aging of the population. We are changing the pension system all the time, automatically. So people are having to work longer to get the same pension. But other countries have the same situation in several cases, and even stronger development in the same direction. So the question to us was, can we learn from each other? And we think that we can learn from other countries. So the next slide. So the starting point is that all are not able to work to the age of retirement. They don't have the ability to work to retirement for health reasons or other reasons. And the reasons could be health reasons, health problems, risk for health problems if I continue to work, or risk for other persons if I continue to work. For example, for pilots or those who are driving trains and so on, they usually have lower retirement age due to not risk for themselves, but risk for other people. And the next slide. So we have studied in practice a large number of European countries and selected 10 countries for more detailed investigations. We are presenting the different countries in different chapters. And we are studying the 4 other Nordic countries: Denmark, Finland, Iceland, and Norway, and 6 other European countries: Austria, Belgium, France, Greece, Italy, and Portugal. And we have made the selection. We have studied several more countries, but we wanted a variation in policies. So we made those 10 countries and we are presenting them in detail. The next slide. And when we have looked through the 10 countries, we found 5 main solutions for early retirement. The first was early pensions for those who have worked many years or for those who started to work as teenagers. And you have it in several countries, and we are coming back to that. The second is early pension for those in some occupations and those with especially demanding work. And you can measure that in different ways. The third solution is early part-time pension or other part-time solutions for those who are close to retirement age. So they could go in pension and part-time, and they could get some economic compensation for that. The fourth one is disability pension or other forms of support for older workers with a decreased ability to work, and you have it in many countries. And the fifth one is early pension, prolonged periods with unemployment benefits for older unemployed workers. So 5 main solutions, and in many cases you have combinations of those solutions. And then we are going to the next slide. And you have worked many years or worked as a teenager. You have it, for example, in Belgium, Denmark, and Italy. In Denmark, it's quite new. It starts in January 1st next year, in 2022, but you can already apply from August for that if you have worked from the age of 16 or 17, something like that. The advantage is possible to reach those who have worked for many years and had a harsh life, working life by that, but there are problems. How calculate the number of years in work? You must maybe a minimum income, not only, but you are working for some days when you are a teenager besides going to school. The number of months worked and so on. So there are problems, and you have to handle them, and you are handling them in different countries in different ways. And how to handle those who migrate to a country and who have worked in another country before arrival, and also those working abroad in a period. For example, in Sweden, that many are in the south of Sweden are working in Denmark for periods, and those in the western part of Sweden are working in Norway for periods, but many other combinations are also possible. And also there is a difference between women and men. Women are also in Sweden more often doing other things when work, taking care of children and working fewer years, and also they are studying to a higher extent as teenagers and not getting a salary those years. More men than women will get pension according to those rules. And also different forms of vocational training. If you have apprentice education with a wage, you get paid pension. But if you have a vocational training at the same age in school with no wage, you get no compensation in the pension system. So there are problems. And the next solution, the next slide, is some occupation or special demanding work. And you have it in many countries, several countries. Of those we have selected, for example, Austria, Finland, France, and Norway. 400 occupations in France, 100 occupations in Norway. It was unexpected for us when we started. You have an advantage, possible to reach those with a very demanding workload and problems, how to decide which occupations and how to measure demanding work. You are measuring it in a very complicated way in Austria and Finland, for example. And how long time should you have been in occupation or have especially demanding work task to get right to an early pension? If you start having a work like that when you are 59, you can't get it when you are 60. So usually you have a rule that you should have worked in such an occupation for 20, 25 or 30 years. You can have also effects on occupational mobility. People are staying because they're in a dangerous occupation because they will get a pension instead of moving to another better occupation. If they are 55, for example, continuing to work until 60 and they get a pension instead of moving to another occupation. And how to change the rules when occupations change over time. If you compare occupations 30 years from now, the same occupations now, they are not the same. You're doing different things. So it's difficult to compare and difficult to change. You get political effects if you are trying to change occupations that they should have a higher retirement age. And the next slide. Part-time solution, part-time pensions, you have it in many countries, often according to agreement with between the employer organizations and the trade unions. And the advantage may make it easier for some to continue to work if you are working hours. They could, instead of taking an early pension at 62, for example, they could work to 68 if they just work 20 hours a week instead of 40 hours a week. And the problems discussed are in some countries, and also in Sweden, it is that they may influence labor supply negatively. If a right to part-time pension is set from a low age, people who are able to work take a part-time pension, and it's going against that political parties want people to work to a higher age. And also there may be some difficulties to organize part-time work in some occupation, but not so in other occupations. It's an issue of fairness. And then we have a next solution, easier access to disability pension for older workers, and you have it in practice in most countries. And as mentioned, it was more easy to get such a pension if you go in Sweden, if you go back 20 years or 30 years or 40 years, but now it's rather difficult to get such a pension. The advantage is that it's possible to reach those who have problems that may worsen if they continue to work. The problems are how to determine what is required for being granted a disability pension. There is a discussion all the time, people who are complaining that they should have been granted a pension, but they have not been granted a pension. It's in the newspapers all the time. And of course, there could be combinations with between disability pension and part-time pension and part-time work. So there are solutions and an important role of employment office in that case. And then we have a fifth solution. Early pension, a prolonged period with unemployment benefits for older unemployed, and we had it in Sweden from the early 1970s to the early 1990s, but we don't have it anymore, but other countries have it. It's common with rules that are less restrictive for older workers who become unemployed in several countries. And the advantage is that older workers who are getting unemployed due to structural economic changes don't have to take an early low old age pension. You can get a low old age pension, for example, if you are 63, but it would have been better for them economically if they could continue to work to 62, but then get unemployment benefits for several years or some other compensation. And the problems discussed are is that it may diminish labor mobility, and you could also have business cycle effects that you have big variations. For example, that many leave and you have a crisis in the economy, and it's difficult to get people back when you have prosperity again. And then the last picture. But we also have, as discussed earlier, other policies that may influence increased age when leaving the labor market. And of course, health policy is very important, healthcare, rehabilitation. So that's the first kind of policy. It's very important to remember that. And also you have work environment policy. You have rules, you have policies, and you should probably have more of that policy, more strict policy, so people can continue to work. And also the traditional Swedish labor market policy, adult education, retraining, and you have it in many countries. In Sweden, it was very much discussed in the 1950s, 1960s, and introduced as the Swedish model in a way, Swedish labor market model in the 1960s. And also, of course, as mentioned, policies against age discrimination. So there are solutions, many different solutions for those who have to leave earlier, but of course it's in a way better to help them to stay a little bit longer with health policy, work environment policy, adult education policies against age discrimination. But you need a combination of helping people to leave early if they really have to do it, but also help people to continue to work if it's possible to do so. So that's very short about the content of those 160 pages.
Yeah, thanks a lot. And you said that this will be available in English soon, or more or less soon, or?
It will be this year, so they are working. We are working. We have to both making it in English, but also we should have a little bit more about the Swedish system, because we have when people in Sweden are reading about the Swedish system, they know a lot, but people outside Sweden don't know so much about the Swedish system. So we have to add maybe 10 or 15 pages about Sweden also. So.
Yeah, I think that would be really beneficial, because it could also contribute, of course, to the broader European discussion that we will now have in the next presentation by Dr. Marchetti probably. Sorry for this and the pronunciation problem. And I will simply hand over to you and ask you to add to this from the European Commission perspective.
Actually, well pronounced. Thank you, Andreas. It is Marchetti. Thank you.
Okay.
So while I'm trying to load the presentation, maybe a couple of words on who I am and where I'm from. So why is it not? Oh, yes. I need to click on this. I take you, you're hearing me because you answered. Can you see also the presentation now? Yes, thank you, Alan. So,
yeah, but not in presentation mode. I think you have to.
If I do this, a second, come on. Is it better?
Not yet. Yeah, no, well, perfect.
Thank you. So I work in the European Commission, and more specifically in a unit working on social protection. So we look at all the workers a lot from the angle of social protection, adequacy and sustainability, in particular pensions, but also others, but not just from that angle. We also look at from the angle of supporting, having the manpower to support the European economic and social system. And also from the side of the well-being, allowing people to work longer, because many do want to work longer, but also allowing people to combine and make up their older life with part pension, part working, maybe part volunteering. So there's actually, we have a wider view on this. Now, how do we do it? That's a bit of a secret. However, it's a secret that will be revealed in the last slide. First, I would like you to look at the way we look at the issue. And the first slide will not surprise you. I think Alan in his introduction already mentioned a lot of these things. The employment rate of people aged 55-64, these are prime group, has been increasing in Europe, in all countries, more in some, less in others. And as you know, also Sweden is not our greatest worry, it's all the way to the left. And some other countries also show relatively high participation, especially when we come to 2020. A lot of countries, it's sort of caught up, increasing more than Sweden has. They haven't quite caught up, so Sweden still at the leads the way. So this has been already looked at. There's a couple of concepts that the next couple of slides will try to show in the way we look at this. One is this. There's one question. We're increasing the effective retirement rates, and people are staying in work longer. So in this group, 55, 64-year-olds, the more and more people who are actually in employment. What does it mean? Because when we look at cross sections, we do see that some of the countries that have a higher employment rates in this group also have a higher number of people who are in disability. Does it mean that if we push more people onto the labor market, we'll have more disabled people, more people who are unemployed because they can't find a job? Well, the answer is not quite. Yes, I mean, it's yes, but to a very small extent. When you look at a EU level, and that's the bar all the way to the left, the blue are the people, the increase in the employment rate. It is a little over 10 percentage points in the year 2006-2016. We haven't repeated this analysis since, but you know, things don't change that fast. And this is almost consistent in countries. Some countries, again, increase more, some increased less, but generally it did not come to a significant increase in the number of people who are unemployed, people who are inactive because of their own illness or disabilities. With a little increase, but it was really minor. Exception Greece, that, you know, we could look in, here at the recession, which was particularly strong in Greece. There was also an exception in France, but the French come back because the data, there were some issues. Generally, the picture you see at European level, you know, is fairly representative. Ireland may be perhaps a bit of an exception. So that's the first question we ask. You know, what is the consequences if more people are onto the labor market? Number two, it is also, mind, these are very rough things. These are a bit of taken as not very fine, very broad looking at things. It's kind of a helicopter views of helicopter views that a 10-year-old could do. Is a difference in percentage, basically. Now, this answered another question, this thing. So, obviously, things are moving in the European labor market. You've seen the increase in the participation of older people in employment, but we also know that overall employment has been increasing. It's been increasing also among young people, especially among women. People get educated more and participate more in the labor market. Again, women have been probably the largest share of the increase. So you could ask the question, when we have more people in employment, age 55 to 64, and they increase, okay, would that depend more on what happens late in life? And we're speaking about pension policies, so people need to retire later. We're talking about health policies. People work more because they can. They have the health to do it. Or because workplaces are becoming safer, or because the kind of work we do is adapted to people working longer. Or is it due to the fact that simply there's more people in the labor market, and if there's more people who are working at age 50, then it's only so natural that more people would also be find themselves still working when they're 60 or 65. So how do we split the two? We look into the changes in the employment between 2011, 2016, people age 50 to 55. And then we looked also at the decrease that start occurring from the age of 55, i.e. the people who started retiring. And look at of these two effects, so affect more people present at work in the prime age, prime working age, and fewer people who are actually leaving employment from age 55 onwards. And the result is that at EU level overall, we have about a 2/3 impact of late employment policy. So we're talking about pension policies, health policies, and so on. And 1/3 impact of the fact that overall the employment population is growing, and the proportion of employed people in the EU is growing. Again, there's a difference between different countries, and in a lot of countries, actually, the pension policy are very, very important. In particular, have played a very important role in Hungary, the first country there on the left, which had an increase in participation 55-64, similar to Germany's, so very high, very fast, as has been said earlier. And the policies, have led to this. So these are the other things you want to look at broadly. What was driving the increase of this employment of older persons? Mind that I'm not presenting here the result for the 60 to 64 is slightly more complicated and so more complicated to explain, but they're very similar in substance. So once at that, The other thing we have been bad looking is looking at the myths about older workers. And if you look it up on a web browser, on a search engine, there's a lot of lists of myths about older workers. But that's also some work they've been doing, looking at dispelling the myths. For example, the fact that older workers are not as effective, and there's been a number of results that actually point to the fact that while usually they were quantifiable, they can do more errors. They do fewer important errors. The younger people, they actually are very effective workers. Older workers also is wrong that they are retained at the expense of youth employment. It's by developing the participation of older people, we also help the chances of employment of the people who are younger. Again, about illness and so on. There are a number of issues that we try to address with research and studies. Before moving into what the EU does, I would like to mention this has led to something. In 2017, the social partners, and mainly speaking about the employers and the unions, supported by the civil society, come to an agreement and sign an agreement that is called about active aging, but it's substantially about working longer. It's about the employers agreeing and committing to creating safe workplaces for older people, to adapting them, to making them welcoming to older people, and the unions promoting staying at work longer for our society. This framework agreement is now undergoing an assessment, which is a bit early in my view, because it actually took years for this agreement at EU level to percolate down to the individual companies. But nevertheless, they are doing the first assessment. They will hear from that relatively soon. And this agreement basically implements the first part of the guiding principle of active aging that the Council had endorsed in 2012, which are about safe workplaces and encouraging longer participation in work. And now come to what we do, how we do support the member states. The support comes from the fact that as a European Union, we have no power in areas of employment or social, so our role is that of supporting. The pillar of social rights in 20 principles, and there are a lot about what Rachel said earlier, but about ensuring equal rights to access for everybody in the Union to work. There's a lot of other things about pensions and health that also have to do with the topic of today. I will not list the principle, it will take a while. The policy action we do is the thing called the European semester, which is another misnomer for which perhaps my employer has become famous, because it lasts the whole year. And it's a yearly cycle of policy review whereby we issue recommendations, which then the Council, so the member states also endorse. The member states work on them with policy reforms. Then we look at the reform, we assess them, and lead to the following year's recommendation, and the thing restarts. Now this has been mixed with the special support that the Union has given following the coronavirus to countries, so that countries can use also this special extra additional financial support to implement the reforms that are necessary to make the society more resilient. There. We also explore example policies. For example, this thing called linking. Linking, when you say linking, most often we mean linking the retirement age to life expectancy. Close to you, Denmark has been one of the first countries that implemented it. So automatically, as life expectancy goes up, the statutory life expectancy gets increased. Finland has followed of late, and in total there are 9 countries in the EU that implemented this linking. Now, linking is a different thing. First of all, is about trying to implement some equality between different generations. So each spends the same proportion of life at work and the same proportion of life in retirement. But also it gives a little bit of you can foresee, so workers can have an idea of how their retirement age can change in the next 10, 20 years that will take for them to reach it, and they will be less subject to the vagaries of changes in policy, as it happened in the past 20 years in the EU. We also set up common scenarios to help the countries assess their situation, the population projections, expenditure, public expenditures, and pension adequacy. And also we do support to public employment services. In particular here is they're trying to develop in a number of countries a labor market for older persons. A number of countries don't have it. And of course, active aging in collaboration with other international organizations such as the WHO and the United Nations. I'm not completely sure I addressed everything you wanted to have from us, but after a question, perhaps I can go more into this or that topic that you might be interested in.
Of course, it didn't raise all the issues that we could discuss, but it was extremely helpful to discuss this. A main point that we should keep in mind is what you said in between, not between the lines, but it's that the EU has no power in this, but has a supportive function for the member states, which I think is crucial also if you think about policy or policy impact. And that brings you also back in this case to the Swedish situation and to the presentation by Tor Harteford, who is an economist at the Swedish Association of Local Authorities and Regions. And so it's then the policy focus on the extended working life. In this case, also from an employer perspective. So going back to the national a little bit and also to the specific perspective of the employers. And now I lost the picture, but I hand over to you. There you are.
Here. I will just try to share my screen as well. So you see the screen? The picture, the slides? Yeah, great.
Yes.
Yes. I'm a labor market economist at the Swedish Association of Local Authorities, and we are representing all the municipalities and regions in Sweden in many ways and in many areas where they are working. But we are also, one of our main tasks is to represent them as an employers organization as well. So we are fairly representing 1.2 million employees employed in the regional and municipal sector in Sweden. That's roughly 22 to 23% of all employed in Sweden. So we are the largest employer in Sweden. And why extended working life is important for employers? To ask that question, I would like to start to describe the situation on the Swedish labor market and the developments the past 10 years. We have been facing increased shortages in labor and in relevant skills, and the mismatch on the labor market has slowly increased from the financial crisis and ahead. And in 2017, the organization Swedish Enterprises presented a study that shows that shortages in 7 out of 10 professions. And a year later, 2018, the Public Employment Services presented another report showing that there were shortages in 8 out of 10 professions. So that's a little bit the situation we have. And according to what happened the last 18 months during the pandemic, we see that this mismatch and shortages has not slowed down. On the contrary, as we see now, the shortages are actually increasing. So, and one of the explanations is the development of the demographic situation, and that has been shifting from 20 to 64, the age of where you are in part of the labor force, towards a more older age groups. And if you see what we're facing the coming 10 years, we will see that the population in the working age 20 to 64 will increase slightly, but the age group over 65 and especially those over 80 will increase much more. And over the same time, there will be a stagnation in the age groups 0 to 19. But this can change, of course, during the time. And this is the figure for the whole of Sweden. But if you go look into the specific regions or municipalities, you can see that in 8 out of 21 regions, they are actually facing a decreasing population in the working age and a higher increase in the older population compared to the national figures. And in several municipalities, they have the same demographic challenges or even worse. There are examples of small municipalities in the rural areas that could employ everyone leaving upper secondary school, and that would be enough to fill their needs. And then we have the private enterprises that also would also like to employ some of the young people. And now after the recovery of the pandemic, we see that especially the manufacturing sector are having bottlenecks and which have a negative impact on production. You see shortages in raw materials, semiconductors, high energy prices, constraint in the transport sector. But we also see that more and more companies and enterprises see that there are shortages in labor and skills, especially, which also have a negative effect on the production. And at the same time, we have a technology shift that has been quite slow for the last 10 years up to now, but it seems to speed up, and both due to innovation and development and increased accessibility to innovation for also small and medium-sized companies. But there is need for increased competitiveness and the need for increased productivity. There are important factors for new production methods. But lack of labor and skills would also force employers to find new ways of production and using innovation and innovative methods. And this is not just specific for the manufacturing sector. It's also now a fact in the production of services. And this structural shift in production using new technologies also creates new demands for new or upgraded skills in the workforce, which in a situation where a shortage already exists, creates increased competition on existing and future labor. So that's a bit the situation on the Swedish labor market, that we are all in need of labor and skills. And if we look into this challenges for municipalities and regions, we are facing recruitments both to meet an aging population, as I said before, but also to replace employees that will retire. And a study that we presented in this May 2021 shows that in the total, our members will have to recruit almost 50,000 new employees every year the coming 10 years to meet both the increased demand and the retirement of existing employees. But if we could postpone the retirement age with 2 years from 65, the number would decrease by approximately 10,000 people a year. So how we can see how extending working age could actually help us. We have seen a trend in employees working longer within our sector before retiring, but it's quite slow increase. The average age of leaving the municipal sector has increased from 63.5 in 2012 to 63.8 in 2020. And in the regions, the increase is from 63.7 2012 into 64 in 2020. So it's slightly slow increase, and it differs, of course, between different professions. If you look at the average age for a medical doctor leaving the sector is 65.4 years, and the lowest is among employees working in food services in hospital and nursing homes and schools, and they on average leaving the sector in 63.2. We don't have data on if employees are retiring. We can see if they leave the sector So for instance, if a medical doctor leaves and start working in a private clinic, that won't show up in our data. But we also assume that the majority of those who leaving the sector at age 62 or older are retiring. There could be some differences there, but most of them probably retire. And the main argument now for our sake is for an extended working life is to secure some of the needed competencies of the employees the coming years. We also see other measures, but this is the main one of the main focuses that we have. But how should we make people extend their working lifestyle then? How can we as an employer motivate people to postpone their retirement, especially in professions that are physical and demanding and that can be challenging when you're becoming older? We have identified a number of actions that has to be taken, both by employers, unions, individuals, and the society, sometimes by one of them, two, or all parties together. Starting with the retirement age and working conditions, research from, among others, IMF shows that the importance of a regulatory retirement age for the actual retirement age. You higher the regulatory retirement age is, they also have an impact on when people actually retire. And we have started to increase the flexible retirement age that we have. It could be a good start and could be a good contribution. Restructuring and possibilities for training and education. Changes in demand in the labor market, continuous changes and possibilities for upgraded skills, training, education will increase the possibility to flexibility, both within current employment and also make it possible to change job. And together with next point, lifelong learning, we see that there must be an infrastructure in place that support individuals who would like to make a break for education in midlife and make it possible, both financially and possibilities for getting a leave from work to do the upgrade in education or retraining or re-educating. This will also make it possible for people to change profession, sectors, and career paths in midlife. And we think that it's important because it can be hard to stay in the same profession or occupation from your 19 to 68, 9. Sometimes you have to have the possibility to change work, upgrade your skills, change within the organization or change the sector. So that's why you have to have a educational system in place that also promote people to change in midlife. Social insurance and collective bargaining insurances. Up to now, there has been a ceiling at the age of 65 in the Swedish welfare systems, where when you're turning 65, you are instead offered retirement. So, and this ceiling has been guidelining most also and sets a guideline for many others that there are still the age of 65, that is the retirement age. This will gradually increase to 67 now in the reform, and this will be done by 2026. And the same goes for all the collective insurances that we have for employees. They're also based on the age 65, sorry. But there are now negotiations that will adjust it to the new situation on the new flexible retirement age. We also have working environment. A continuous work with the working environment has to be made possible, so make it possible for as many to work as long as they like. And this has been mentioned before. And it must be also possible when you're getting older to stay in work, even if there are physical and demanding work. And also management and governing. There must be a leadership in place who also strive to find new methods and are struggling to organize work in a way that make it as possible for as many as possible to work also with physical and demanding jobs as long as they like, so they don't feel that they have to retire before the age whatever. 65, 6 or 7, just due to that they don't have the health to continue to work. And lastly, attitudes. This is maybe one of the most important and the difficult factor to work with. Even if Sweden have had an flexible retirement age since 1997, most people retire when they're turning 65 anyway. We have data from a pension fund targeted at the employees in regional and municipal sector called the KPA. They're showing that the number who retire around the 65th birthday has decreased, but they are still a majority, even though the retirement age is between 61 and 67 has been. And this is also an attitude from an employer's perspective. There are still many employers in Sweden that when employees getting closer to the 65th birthday ask the question, will you retire now when you turn 65? So this attitude has to change. And when it comes to equality, we also see that why should women retire when their husband do? Study shows that it's quite common among women to retire at the same time their husband do, and often they are married to an older man, which means that they retire at a younger age. So this is also had to do with the attitudes that should the couple retire together or should they work longer, because these also have a negative impact on the women's pensions. And lastly, we see in articles and discussions among people on the matter of retirement, and the focus is often not how to extend your working life, it's rather how to retire as early as possible. So that's an attitude that is very common among very many people. So to conclude, there are individual, societal, and employers' argument for an extending working life. And from our perspective, the most important factor is to secure access to labor and skills. With the demographic development, we see an increasing demand for our services at the same time as we see stagnating labor force, and in some part of the country also a decreasing labor force. So that's our main objective for this. I stop there. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much for a very comprehensive contribution on the Swedish perspective. And I was happy to see lifelong learning being mentioned explicitly here, because that's also one of the focuses for EIWO in the progress of the program. We will not shut this meeting, of course, now just because we invited for this time, but I hope we can continue the discussion. There's already a comment by Rob Anderson. Do you want to take this also verbally, Rob? You mentioned the strong importance of the pension age and on a state level.
Yeah, I just wanted to register that I wonder, is particularly in these country comparisons, whether occupational pension schemes shouldn't be considered, as they play a much more important role in some countries than others, but in some countries play a very significant role, I think, in people's decisions regarding retirement and extending working life. And in countries like the UK or Ireland, also significant differences between different occupations in occupational pension schemes, would reflect inequalities in both preferences and opportunities to continue working longer. So I just feel that when we refer to something like pension ages, which are so important, and when we all talk about the state pension age, that we should reflect a little on the changing role as well of particularly occupational and maybe in some cases private occupational pensions. Thank you.
Any comments on this or further comments?
And Andres, Liam Foster, yeah, thanks, Rob. I totally agree. I've been looking into this a little bit in relation to the UK specifically and some other work. Certainly there have been changes in when people can access private pensions. There are going to be issues in terms of the move from defined benefit to defined contribution schemes and the risks that present in the UK for older workers and older women who are more likely to have smaller pots. Auto enrolment is going to be important in the UK. Of course, it gives more lower paid and women access to occupational pensions, but it also excludes more women. So there are issues about caring there, for instance, and part-time workers and whether people fit certain eligibility criteria. And I think in terms of occupational pensions and the role of the state pension, it's absolutely right to say that some people are basically in a position to choose whether they can retire or not, and the state pension doesn't play such a big role in those decisions because they've accumulated an occupational pension. And some of the pension freedoms developments in the UK, I think, could be particularly problematic for women, given lower pension pots in general. So yeah, I think there is a difference in terms of state pension provision and how it operates, and occupational pensions, and also think about the kind of rights associated with occupational pensions. So in some cases, there may be rights for a spouse, for instance, but actually with a move towards defined contribution pensions, a lot of those rights are going to disappear, which has real implications for women. So yeah, totally agree, Rob.
Thank you.
More to be done there.
If you want to raise your hands, please either use the raise the hand on the screen or just write in the chat. I have the first hand. May I from Ettore Marchetti, and then otherwise I try to look around and look in the chat.
Thank you, Andreas. Yeah, actually, what I'm about to say is more like underlining the question that very appropriately Rob asked, then providing an answer, and also perhaps say two words how we look at it. Yes, we are aware of this, and especially of the fact that when we go into a supplementary pension, be it occupational or personal, we are in a complex constellation of schemes. Not only the schemes, but also there's the issue of when the individual workers or individual people start saving under those schemes, that determines what the rights are when they come to around their pensionable age. And we were very abruptly awakened to this in 2012. Eurostat launched this module on retirement, and they asked the question, so at what age did you start receiving the first pension? And we realized that in a lot of the countries where there are a lot of the occupational schemes, they started early, because some of these people had some pension very early, like even in the late 50s, but very, very small amounts. The real pension came later. So there's a lot of if you want, bits and pieces that needs to be studied. And one important issue is the issues of equality, that Rachel, but also Liam mentioned earlier, is important. And what we're now looking at is I've been launching a study on the pension credits for people who are unemployed for periods, or have to abandon or reduce the workload for childcare, and therefore reduce their contribution into these kind of schemes. And while we have a relatively fair idea what happens to the statutory state schemes, we do need to get to know a lot more about the supplementary scheme often offered within enterprises. Within this, I would say that we are also looking overall at this occupational pension as a way to improve the adequacy of pension schemes in the context of aging, and looking at ways of motivating the participation into these schemes, but also making them accessible to everybody, including those who don't earn as much. Thank you.
Thanks a lot. I think it's important to also to raise this question. What are the gaps? Where's information missing? Because that's what we are mostly also collecting for outlining further research. There was a hand by Eskiel, but it disappeared.
Oh yeah, try to answer. There are differences between different countries, and there is also fast development. And in January next year, there will be published a book by Macmillan with many chapters on the development during the last 25 years in regarding supplementary pensions. I've written the Swedish chapter, but there are chapters on many European countries, as also the development in the US written by John Turner. So I think it's not the same all the time. It's changing, and it's different. It differs a lot between different countries.
Any more comments on this directly or to the presentations? We are still basically as a program, as a research program, we're looking for these open issues that we try to identify, and that was very helpful to get this overview from a various perspective, from a system perspective to European policies and Swedish employer perspectives on this. I think that is quite stimulating for this program, and I think we can benefit we will benefit from these discussions. And it would be great if we can come back to you. We can have the discussion also later on if there's more input by email. So please refer to us, just contact us. And we will also take the liberty to contact you as the experts then. And I want to take the opportunity simply to advertise now for the webinars, for the next webinars, if there's no more comments at that stage. Because we'll have our next webinar on November 11th and then on December 9th. On slightly different topics, but connected to it, of course, all from the EIWO context. It's about inequality and new exclusion risks in a prolongation of late work, with a research presentation by Gülin Oylü, and another research presentation in the EIWO webinar 3 by Chiara Focacci on polarization, inhomogenization, and adult learning and education. So from a learning perspective, and I would be happy to see you there and to see you participating in these further events and in these discussions, and maybe can also advertise for this. Sorry, there's another comment. That's why I hesitate. And who's SER? I don't know the name for this, but maybe you can exemplify this.
It's Sarah Ricks.
Ah, okay. So sorry, I didn't reach to the end. That's now I reached it. Yeah.
Hi, Sarah.
Hi, Ellen.
Yes, Sarah. You want to?
Sarah,
elaborate?
good to see you.
Good to see you too, Gerd.
Do you want an answer to your question?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So as far as the 4 countries are concerned, there is no evidence that we found that a life course perspective is being adopted, or even a work course perspective. And, you know, of course, I know where you're coming from, and I absolutely accept and very often articulate the argument that many of our approaches to late working life are very cohort-centric, and you need a cohort-centric approach to deal with the inequalities that have been created at earlier stages of the life course and work course, and the deficits that many workers have in terms of education and training and so on. But if you're going to prevent those, you've got to have a life course and work course perspective. So that means everything from early life through adolescence, through midlife. And I caught just a signal of that in Tor's last slide on behalf of Swedish employers in the municipalities. And it did seem to me that there was a grasp in that slide of the importance of a more life course approach. He was recognizing that you can't deal with all of the inequalities and the deficits that older workers have by just remedial approaches, that you have to try to prevent them in earlier stages of the life course. And of course, the state has a role in that, individuals has a role, but employers also have a crucial role So I was really pleased to see that was recognised by Tor.
Thank
Hope
you.
that answers you.
It helps.
Lovely
It's a
to
start.
see you. Well, keep smiling.
Yeah, but I think that's also one of the reasons why we chose also the approach in EIWO also to look for employer or branch policies. So to look at who's responsible for this and taking this lifelong learning perspective as a life course oriented approach towards longer participation in working life, to an extension of working life. I think that's quite crucial. And of course, there is a risk to replicate this, but on the other hand, maybe it's also the case that policies are still in the same position and we have to replicate this. I'm not sure. Yes, but now I got stuck in my final words in a way by reading on the side in the chat. So basically, thanks for these contributions, and we should continue this discussion. Of course, we can continue this in other webinars, but we can continue this also in other ways. And I was happy to see so many interested in the topic, and hope that we can continue in the next webinars, maybe also beyond this, also externally. Thanks a lot for your participation and for your patience, and a special thanks for all the contributions, which were really excellent to listen and I hope we can continue on this. Thanks a lot.
Thank you very much, Andreas.
Thank you to everyone.